Sometimes the smallest decision made after closing time becomes the one that decides who gets to stay when the sun comes up. The rain had been falling over Maple Street for nearly 4 hours, turning the sidewalks into silver ribbons beneath the tired glow of old streetlights. Most of the neighborhood had already gone dark. Storefront signs blinked out one by one, leaving only the faint amber light inside Mercer Bakery shining through the fogged windows. Daniel Mercer stood alone behind the counter, wiping flour from his hands before reaching for the switch that powered down the antique cash register. It clicked softly, the familiar sound marking the end of another long day. He glanced toward the handwritten temperature log hanging beside the oven controls. Every night ended the same way. Oven off. Final temperature recorded. Remaining bread counted. Unsold loaves marked for the community pantry before sunrise. His pen moved carefully across the paper. 11:47 p.m. Oven off. No further sales. One final signature. Nothing dramatic. Just another quiet habit that had become part of his life after years of running a bakery that barely earned enough to keep the lights on. Behind the curtain leading to the small office, his 9-year-old son Noah slept curled beneath an old quilt on a worn couch, exhausted after finishing homework at the back table while his father kneaded dough long after dinner. Daniel smiled faintly when he heard the boy breathe. That sound alone made every 14-hour shift worth surviving. He reached for the front door, flipped the sign from open to closed, and turned the deadbolt halfway before a soft knock interrupted the silence. It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. It was almost hesitant, as if whoever stood outside had already been told no too many times tonight. Daniel looked through the rain-streaked glass. A woman stood beneath the narrow awning, completely soaked despite trying to shield herself with a thin coat that had long since surrendered to the storm. Wet strands of chestnut hair clung to her face. She carried no umbrella, no luggage, no shopping bags. Just a small leather notebook pressed tightly against her chest to keep it dry. Before Daniel could move, another voice drifted through the rain. Mercer. Daniel turned his head. Graham Voss, the neighborhood property manager, stood across the street holding a black umbrella, his polished shoes untouched by puddles. He checked his watch before speaking again. You're closed. Daniel nodded once. I know. Graham looked toward the woman waiting beneath the awning. Don't let her in. The woman lowered her eyes, saying nothing. She didn't plead. She didn't wave. She simply stood there, shivering as cold rainwater dripped from the edge of the awning onto the sidewalk below. Graham crossed halfway through the crosswalk, but stopped short of the bakery door. Anyone inside after 11 is considered business activity. You know the rules. Daniel rested one hand on the lock. She's not buying anything. Doesn't matter. Graham's voice remained calm, almost friendly. Rules exist for everyone. Daniel looked back toward the woman. Water dripped from her sleeves onto the concrete. She wasn't asking for coffee. She wasn't asking for bread. She wasn't asking for charity. She was simply trying not to spend another hour standing in freezing rain. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The bakery's old brick oven, still warm from the day's final batch, released gentle heat that lingered in the quiet room. Daniel thought about the warning letter he had received only 2 weeks earlier. One more violation and his lease renewal could disappear. One more mistake could leave Noah without the only home he remembered above the bakery. Graham folded his arms. Lock the door. Daniel slowly removed his hand from the deadbolt, reached instead for the handle, and unlocked it completely. The bell above the entrance chimed softly as he pulled the door open. Ma'am, he said with quiet kindness. You can wait inside until the rain eases up. The woman hesitated. Her eyes shifted toward the silent cash register, then toward the closed sign hanging clearly in the window, before settling on Daniel's face. I don't have any money with me, she said gently. Daniel stepped aside without hesitation. Good, he answered, because I'm not selling anything tonight. She entered carefully, almost afraid to leave footprints across the clean floor. Daniel handed her a folded towel from beneath the counter before carrying a steaming bowl of vegetable soup from the employee warmer and placing it beside the brick oven. That seat stays warm for hours, he said. You'll be more comfortable there. She looked at the bowl, then back at him with quiet surprise. "Thank you." Daniel simply nodded before returning to wipe the last flour from the counter as though nothing unusual had happened. Outside, Graham raised his phone, silently took a photograph through the rain-speckled window, and smiled to himself before walking away into the darkness. The woman accepted the towel with both hands, carefully folding it after drying the rain from her face, as though she had borrowed something valuable instead of something ordinary. Daniel poured a cup of hot coffee and placed it beside the bowl without saying another word. He did not ask her name. He did not ask where she had come from. He did not ask why every other business on the block had left her standing outside in the storm. The only sound inside the bakery was the quiet ticking of the old wall clock and the gentle crackle of warmth escaping from the brick oven that had already been turned off for the night. After a few minutes, she finally spoke. "You are not worried about getting into trouble?" Daniel smiled faintly while stacking cooling racks for the morning. "I am worried about plenty of things." She glanced toward the sleeping child behind the curtain. "Then why take another risk?" Daniel folded a clean apron before answering. "Because some risks let you sleep better afterward." She looked down into the steaming soup but did not immediately eat. It seemed as though she was studying every detail around her instead. Her eyes paused on the handwritten temperature log beside the oven, then on the dark cash register, then on the small basket labeled community pantry with several wrapped loaves waiting for the morning donation pickup. Nothing about the room suggested wealth. The paint near the ceiling had begun to peel. One display shelf leaned slightly because one leg had been repaired more than once. The mixer in the corner carried scratches earned through decades of honest work. Yet everything was spotless, organized, and treated with quiet respect. Daniel noticed where she was looking. Old equipment lasts longer when people take care of it. She nodded almost to herself. So do neighborhoods. Before Daniel could answer, another knock echoed against the glass. This one was louder. He opened the door just enough to see a delivery driver wearing a rain jacket holding a clipboard beneath a plastic folder. "Late notice," the driver apologized. "Management said every tenant has to receive it tonight." Daniel signed for the envelope and thanked him before closing the door against another blast of cold wind. The heavy paper carried the logo of Bell Property Holdings across the top. Even before opening it, he felt his stomach tighten. He slid one finger beneath the seal and unfolded several printed pages. The first page carried bold letters across the top. Notice of violation. The second page announced a formal review of his lease compliance. The third informed him that proposed rental adjustments would be discussed immediately because of repeated operational concerns. Daniel read every line twice without speaking. The woman quietly set down her spoon. "Bad news." He forced a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Nothing that worrying about tonight will fix." She stood slowly. "May I?" He hesitated for only a moment before handing her the papers. She read them carefully, far more carefully than most people would have. Her eyes moved from one paragraph to another, lingering over dates instead of dramatic language. Finally, she looked up. "This says the inspection happened at 12:40 in the morning." Daniel frowned. "That cannot be right." She handed the notice back. "Why?" He pointed toward the handwritten temperature log still hanging beside the oven. "Because the oven was shut down before midnight. The register was already off. I locked the sales system before opening the door." She glanced again toward the log sheet. "You keep records every night?" "Every single night." "Why?" Daniel shrugged gently. "Flour can be replaced. Trust cannot." She looked thoughtful but asked nothing more. A soft voice suddenly drifted from behind the curtain. "Dad." Noah rubbed his eyes as he stepped into the bakery wearing oversized socks and holding his favorite paperback beneath one arm. Daniel immediately folded the violation notice closed before the boy could read it. "Sorry, buddy. Did we wake you?" Noah shook his head and looked curiously toward the unfamiliar visitor. The woman smiled warmly. "Hello." Noah smiled back with the natural confidence only children seem to have. "Did you get caught in the rain too?" She laughed quietly for the first time that evening. "I certainly did." Noah walked over to the basket marked community pantry and pointed toward the wrapped bread. Dad says those are already promised to somebody tomorrow, so we never sell them even if people ask. Daniel gently rested a hand on his son's shoulder. Time for bed again. Noah nodded without arguing and disappeared behind the curtain once more. The woman watched him leave before turning back toward Daniel. He trusts you completely. Daniel looked toward the curtain with tired but grateful eyes. I try to earn that every day. Outside, rain continued tapping softly against the windows, but across the street a security camera mounted above the neighboring storefront quietly recorded Graham Voss walking back beneath his umbrella. He stopped beside the bakery long enough to look through the glass at the woman sitting beside the warm oven, then slipped something beneath the front door before disappearing once again into the darkness. The rain finally softened into a steady whisper against the bakery windows sometime after midnight. Daniel checked the lock once more before switching off the last light above the display case, leaving only the warm glow from the old brick oven filling the room with gentle amber light. The woman remained seated near the oven, slowly finishing the bowl of soup as though she had not enjoyed a quiet meal in a very long time. Daniel gathered the remaining bread that had not been sold that day and carried it toward a wooden shelf near the back door. Every loaf was wrapped carefully, labeled with the baking date, and placed inside reusable baskets beneath a handwritten sign that read Community Pantry Morning Pickup. The woman watched him without interrupting. Finally she asked, "You still donate bread even after receiving that notice?" Daniel tied the final paper label around a loaf before answering. "Those families are expecting breakfast tomorrow morning. They should not pay for my problems." She looked toward the envelope still resting unopened on the counter. "Most people would save every loaf they could." Daniel smiled quietly. "That is probably why most people are better at business than I am." She returned his smile but did not laugh. Instead she stood and slowly walked around the bakery, careful not to touch anything without permission. Her attention stopped at a worn ledger lying beside the donation baskets. "May I look?" Daniel nodded. "It is only inventory." She opened the book and found page after page of neat handwriting stretching back several years. Every donated loaf had been recorded. Every community pantry delivery carried a date, a quantity, and a signature from the volunteer who collected it. Nothing had been exaggerated. Nothing had been rounded upward to make the numbers look generous. Even the smallest contribution had been counted honestly. "You keep records of bread you give away?" she asked softly. Daniel shrugged. "If I keep careful records when people buy from me, I should be just as careful when they cannot." She slowly closed the ledger. "Most charitable programs do not document this much." Daniel leaned against the cooling work table. "This is not charity. It is accountability. Someday someone may ask where every loaf went. I want the answer to already exist." The words settled quietly between them. Outside, the street had grown completely empty except for the occasional passing headlights reflecting across rain-soaked pavement. Several minutes later, another sound approached from the sidewalk. A bicycle rolled to a stop outside the bakery. A teenage newspaper carrier stepped beneath the awning, dripping rainwater onto the concrete while adjusting a heavy canvas bag. Daniel recognized him immediately. He unlocked the door just long enough for the young man to step inside. "Morning comes early, Milo," Daniel said warmly. The teenager smiled with obvious embarrassment. "Sorry to bother you this late." His eyes drifted toward the pastry case before quickly looking away. "I missed dinner." Without a single word about payment, Daniel reached into a tray beneath the counter and selected a slightly uneven cinnamon roll. "This one cracked while baking," he said casually. "Cannot sell it." Milo accepted it gratefully. "What do I owe you?" Daniel shook his head. "You owe me a promise." "What kind?" "Eat it while it is still warm." The teenager laughed, thanked him, and pedaled back into the fading rain. The woman had watched the entire exchange without speaking. After the door closed again, she quietly walked to the display case and looked inside. Every perfect pastry remained available for tomorrow's customers. Only the imperfect one had left the bakery. "That roll was not ruined," she observed. Daniel smiled.
No.
But he would not have accepted it if I had called it a gift. She looked at him for several thoughtful seconds before asking, "You protect people's dignity very carefully, do not you?" Daniel answered while placing the empty tray into the sink. "Everyone has enough reasons to feel small. I try not to become another one." Her eyes drifted back toward the donation ledger resting beside the temperature log. She noticed the handwriting matched perfectly. The same steady pen had recorded every loaf, every oven temperature, every closing hour, and every pantry delivery for years. Small habits, quiet habits, honest habits, the kind that became invisible until someone bothered to notice them. She reached into her coat pocket and removed the small leather notebook she had protected from the rain all evening. Without saying what she was writing, she carefully noted the bakery's name, the time, and one simple sentence before closing the cover again. Daniel pretended not to notice. Outside, across the dark street, the neighborhood security camera silently continued recording. Its lens captured the front entrance, the quiet exchange with Milo, the dark cash register that had never turned back on, and the envelope that still rested beneath the edge of the counter. As the first faint hint of dawn began to soften the eastern sky, neither Daniel nor the woman realized that another bakery 3 blocks away had received an almost identical violation notice that very same night, printed with the very same language, the very same signature, and the very same promise that one more mistake would cost everything. Morning arrived quietly, but peace did not arrive with it. The rain clouds drifted east, leaving the streets washed clean beneath pale golden light, while Mercer Bakery prepared for another business day that suddenly felt much heavier than the one before. Daniel unlocked the front door just before 6 o'clock, swept away the rainwater gathered along the entrance, and reached down to retrieve the envelope that had been slipped beneath the door during the night. It was heavier than he remembered. He carried it to the counter without opening it immediately. Fresh coffee filled the room with its familiar aroma while the first trays of sourdough cooled beside the window. Noah wandered out from the back room rubbing sleep from his eyes, still wrapped in the oversized sweatshirt he liked to wear on chilly mornings. Daniel smiled warmly and handed him a warm blueberry muffin before quietly sliding the envelope beneath a stack of invoices so the boy would not see the words printed across the front. The woman noticed the gesture but said nothing. Instead, she helped straighten several chairs without being asked, moving naturally through the bakery as though careful not to become a burden. When Noah finished eating, Daniel handed him his backpack and reminded him to wait upstairs until school began. The boy nodded obediently, waved politely toward the woman, and disappeared up the narrow staircase leading to the apartment above the bakery. Only after the footsteps faded did Daniel finally unfold the documents completely. The silence that followed lasted several long seconds. The notice declared that because of a reported operational violation after business hours, Bell Property Holdings reserved the right to review the renewal of his lease. The proposed monthly rent adjustment printed near the bottom made his shoulders sink. It was nearly 50% higher than his current payment. He quietly exhaled without speaking. The woman stepped closer. "May I read the rest?" Daniel hesitated, then handed her the papers. She studied each page with unusual patience, paying less attention to the bold warnings than to the dates, signatures, and reference numbers printed in small type along the margins. Finally, she looked up. "This increase was prepared before last night." Daniel frowned. "How can you tell?" She pointed toward the document number. "This filing sequence suggests it was generated several days ago." Daniel looked at the page again but saw only numbers. "You understand legal paperwork better than most people." She closed the folder gently, enough to know that someone expected this conversation before it happened. Before Daniel could respond, the front door opened. An older woman carrying a small bouquet of fresh flowers stepped inside with her usual cheerful smile. Mrs. Alvarez owned the flower shop 2 doors away and had purchased bread from Daniel nearly every morning for 8 years. She noticed the papers immediately. "Another notice?" she asked quietly. Daniel attempted a reassuring smile. "Nothing worth ruining your morning over." Mrs. Alvarez sighed. "They came to my shop last week. She reached into her purse and unfolded a folded yellow notice nearly identical to Daniel's. "Improper sidewalk display," she said. "I moved one flower stand 6 inches past the chalk line." The woman standing beside Daniel glanced quickly between the two documents. The wording was almost identical. Even the paragraph spacing matched perfectly. Mrs. Alvarez shook her head. "3 businesses on this block have received notices this month." Daniel looked surprised. Why did nobody say anything? Because everyone thought they were the only one. Those words settled over the bakery more heavily than the morning silence. The woman carefully laid both notices side by side on the counter. The same administrative language appeared again and again. The same signature. The same reference code. The same polite warning that another violation could affect lease renewal. She traced one finger beneath the signature without commenting. Daniel noticed where she was looking. "You think it means something?" She answered carefully. "I think patterns deserve attention." Mrs. Alvarez lowered her voice. "Graham told me these inspections were random." The woman asked gently, "Did he inspect your shop after closing too?" Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "He arrived after everyone had gone home." Daniel looked toward the bakery window where early sunlight now reflected across the clean sidewalk. For the first time, last night's decision felt connected to something much larger than a single act of kindness. The woman slowly folded the notices and returned them. "May I ask you something?" Daniel nodded. "If someone offered to make all of this disappear tomorrow, but only for your bakery, would you accept?" Daniel looked toward the staircase where Noah had disappeared only moments earlier. Then he looked around the bakery that had shaped nearly every year of his son's childhood. His answer came quietly but without hesitation. "Not if everyone else had to lose theirs." The woman held his gaze for a long moment before slipping her small leather notebook back into her coat pocket. Outside, across the street, Graham Voss stood beside a parked sedan speaking calmly into his phone. As he ended the call, he glanced toward the bakery window, smiled almost imperceptibly, and said one sentence before closing the car door. He still does not realize this was never about one bakery. Graham did not enter the bakery until nearly 9 o'clock. By then the breakfast crowd had already thinned, and the comforting aroma of fresh bread lingered in the warm morning air. He stepped inside carrying a polished leather folder beneath one arm and wearing the same calm expression that made every unpleasant conversation sound almost reasonable. Daniel looked up from wrapping a loaf for an elderly customer and smiled politely. "Good morning." Graham returned the smile. "I hope I am not interrupting." "You usually arrive after the interruptions have already begun," Daniel replied gently. Graham chuckled as though they shared a private joke. "I only came to help clear up a misunderstanding." He placed the leather folder on the counter. "Sign a simple acknowledgement that you remained open after business hours. Pay the reduced fine, and I will personally recommend that your lease review proceeds smoothly." The words were friendly. The timing was not. Daniel did not reach for the papers. "I cannot sign something that is not true." Graham leaned forward slightly. "You had someone inside after closing." "I gave someone shelter." "The report says you continued operating." Daniel quietly pointed toward the antique cash register sitting dark beneath the display shelf. The register was shut down before she entered. Graham barely glanced at it. "That detail will not change the outcome." Across the room, the woman remained near the window, appearing more interested in a tray of cooling rolls than the conversation itself. She finally spoke in a calm voice. "How did you already know this would affect his lease renewal?" Graham turned toward her with professional courtesy. "Repeated violations naturally influence renewal decisions." "Repeated?" she asked. "The notice says this incident triggered the review." Graham answered without hesitation. He was already one violation away. Daniel looked up. "Only my attorney and the property owner should know that." For the briefest moment, Graham's expression tightened before the familiar smile returned. "Property management keeps detailed records." The woman nodded thoughtfully but asked nothing else. Graham slid the acknowledgement form another inch across the counter. I am trying to save you unnecessary trouble. Daniel looked down at the signature line. Then he quietly pushed the document back without touching the pen resting beside it. If the truth creates trouble, I would rather deal with the trouble than lose the truth. Graham sighed as though disappointed by a stubborn friend. Think carefully. Opportunities rarely knock twice. Before Daniel could answer, a cheerful electronic voice echoed unexpectedly from beneath the counter. Playback complete. Noah's small digital recorder, which he had used the previous evening to practice reading aloud for school, had automatically resumed after its battery finished charging overnight. The device had been left connected beside the order printer. A familiar voice filled the bakery. Just one more violation and his renewal disappears. Graham froze. The sentence echoed clearly through the quiet room. Then another voice, unmistakably his own, followed. That is all it takes. Daniel stared at the recorder in surprise. Noah hurried from the staircase, embarrassed. I am sorry, Dad. I forgot it was still plugged in. Daniel knelt beside his son. You did nothing wrong. The woman watched Graham instead of the recorder. His calm mask had not disappeared, but it had shifted just enough for someone paying close attention to notice. Interesting, she said softly. You seemed very certain about the outcome before any official review had begun. Graham recovered almost immediately. Private recordings can be misleading. Perhaps, she replied, but certainty often reveals more than sound. Graham closed his leather folder with measured precision. I would advise you not to rely on recordings made without context. Daniel stood slowly. Then I will rely on facts. Graham looked directly at him. Facts can become expensive. Daniel answered without raising his voice. So can dishonesty. Several customers who had quietly paused their conversations during the exchange now pretended to study the pastry case, but every pair of ears remained fixed on the counter. Graham noticed the attention and immediately softened his tone. I wish you the best, Daniel. Truly. He turned toward the door, then paused with one hand on the handle. By the way, he said without looking back, it would be unfortunate if this became the final incident before your renewal deadline. The bell above the entrance rang softly as he stepped outside. Silence settled over the bakery for several long seconds. Noah looked nervously toward his father. Did I make things worse? Daniel rested a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. No, Buddy. Sometimes the truth simply arrives before anyone is ready for it. The woman walked to the counter and looked at the small recorder. May I hear that again later? Daniel nodded. If it helps, explain what really happened. She met his eyes with quiet seriousness. It might help explain much more than that. Outside, Graham stopped beside his car and made a brief phone call. His voice remained calm, but one sentence carried through the slightly open window before the door closed. He has started asking the right questions. Move up the timetable. The bakery returned to its familiar rhythm after Graham left, but nothing inside Daniel felt familiar anymore. Customers came and went with smiles, morning greetings, and small conversations about the weather, while beneath the counter the little digital recorder rested beside the handwritten temperature log like two ordinary objects that suddenly carried unusual weight. The woman remained longer than Daniel expected. She helped wipe a table after an elderly customer spilled coffee, carried an empty tray back to the kitchen without being asked, and quietly observed every routine that made the bakery function. She never offered advice. She simply paid attention. Near lunchtime, another visitor arrived. Maya-chan stepped through the front door carrying a slim briefcase and a stack of legal folders tucked beneath one arm. Daniel greeted her with visible relief. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Maya smiled warmly before shaking his hand. You said it could not wait. Daniel introduced the woman as the stranger who had been caught in the storm the previous evening. The two women exchanged polite greetings, each studying the other with quiet curiosity. Daniel explained everything from the late-night shelter to the violation notice, Graham's visit, and the unexpected recording from Noah's device. Maya listened without interrupting, occasionally making brief notes in the margin of a yellow legal pad. When Daniel finished, She asked only one question. Do you still have every document exactly as you received it? Daniel nodded immediately. Nothing has been changed. Good, Maya replied. Never improve evidence. Preserve it. She examined the temperature log first, comparing the handwriting, dates, and signatures from previous weeks. Then she checked the cash register's automatic closing report, which clearly showed the final transaction ending before 11:47. Finally, she listened carefully to the recorder. Graham's voice filled the bakery once again. Just one more violation and his renewal disappears. Maya pressed pause and looked toward Daniel. This alone does not prove wrongdoing. Daniel nodded. I figured as much. But it proves something important, she continued. He knew details that should have remained confidential. The woman standing nearby asked calmly, would that matter legally? Maya answered without hesitation. Not by itself. Patterns matter more than isolated moments. The woman considered those words carefully before asking another question. Suppose there were records showing similar notices given to other businesses under similar circumstances. Would that become a pattern? Maya looked at her with growing interest. Yes, especially if the language, timing, or administrative process repeated. Daniel leaned against the counter. Mrs. Alvarez showed us one this morning. Maya opened another folder. Then we should ask whether others received the same treatment. Daniel immediately reached for the telephone. Maya gently stopped him. Not yet. He looked puzzled. Why not? Because frightened people deserve the chance to choose whether they want to become witnesses. Daniel slowly lowered his hand. You are right. The woman watched that brief exchange with quiet approval. She had asked difficult questions all morning, yet this answer seemed to matter more than any legal strategy. A few minutes later, while Daniel prepared fresh sandwiches for the lunch crowd, Maya noticed a thin folder partially hidden beneath the stack of violation papers. What is this? Daniel glanced over. Maintenance reports. Maya opened it carefully. Inside were years of inspection records, repair invoices, and signed approvals. Everything appeared organized until one page caught her attention. She compared two nearly identical forms dated several months apart. Daniel, she said quietly, have you noticed this? He walked over. The same inspection code appeared on both forms, but one described a completed repair while the other claimed the repair had never been performed. The signatures looked almost identical, yet the printed approval numbers differed by one digit. Daniel frowned. I never saw that. Maya looked thoughtful. Someone may have copied an older form instead of creating a new one. The woman remained silent, but her eyes lingered on the duplicated code. She slowly removed her leather notebook and wrote another brief line. Daniel smiled politely. You write down everything. She returned the notebook to her pocket. Important decisions should never depend on memory alone. The afternoon sun slipped through the bakery windows, casting long bands of golden light across the old wooden floor. Customers continued arriving, unaware that a quiet investigation had begun beside the bread racks. Before leaving, Maya gathered the documents into careful piles. Do not accuse anyone yet, she said. Collect facts. Preserve records. Let every honest document speak before any person does. Daniel nodded. I can do that. As Maya reached the front door, the woman asked one final question. If the truth protects only him, is that enough? Maya paused before answering. Real justice rarely belongs to one person. If the pattern is real, someone else is waiting for the same truth. After Maya departed, Daniel looked through the front window toward the neighboring businesses lining the block. The flower shop, the shoe repair store, the family grocery, and the old bookstore all stood quietly beneath the afternoon light. For the first time, he wondered how many of those doors had received envelopes slipped underneath them after everyone had gone home. And across town, inside a conference room overlooking the city, a property acquisition schedule was quietly moved forward by 48 hours. The next morning began before sunrise. Daniel unlocked the bakery while the sky was still painted in muted shades of blue, determined to let facts guide him instead of fear. The temperature log from the rainy night rested beside the old cash register, and Noah's small recorder remained carefully stored in a drawer beneath the counter. Maya had been right. Honest records deserved patience before they deserved conclusions. The woman arrived quietly with 2 cups of coffee she had purchased from a shop several blocks away because she refused to take anything from Daniel without giving something in return. She placed 1 cup beside him and asked, "Have you slept at all?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Enough to remember why this place matters." Before another word could be exchanged, Mrs. Alvarez stepped into the bakery carrying a cardboard folder instead of flowers. "I found something," she said. "I almost threw it away." Inside were copies of inspection notices she had received during the past year. Daniel spread them across the counter beside his own documents. The woman leaned closer. Maya, who had returned early after receiving Daniel's message, adjusted her glasses and began comparing every page one by one. She circled dates first, then signatures, then reference numbers. Finally, she stopped speaking altogether. Daniel noticed the silence. "What is it?" Maya pointed to 3 different notices issued months apart. "Look at the inspection times." Mrs. Alvarez's notice claimed an inspection at 10:55 in the evening. Daniel's listed 12:40 after midnight. A third notice from the shoe repair shop recorded 11:18. The times seemed ordinary until Maya laid a calendar beside them. These inspections supposedly happened within minutes of each other on opposite ends of the neighborhood. One inspector could not physically be in all 3 places. Daniel stared at the pages. "So at least one report is wrong." Maya nodded slowly. "Or more than one?" The woman quietly asked, "Can we verify the times independently?" Daniel looked toward the wall where his electric meter records were stored with utility bills. The bakery's energy reports should show exactly when the ovens shut down. Within minutes, he returned carrying a binder of monthly statements. The bakery's smart meter showed a sharp drop in electricity exactly when the temperature log recorded the ovens being turned off. Maya smiled for the first time that morning. "Now we have 2 independent records telling the same story," Daniel added softly. "And the cash register closed before both of them." 3 records, Maya corrected. 3 honest systems that have never met each other are saying the same thing. The woman remained thoughtful instead of excited. One truth is stronger when it arrives from different directions. Daniel looked at her with quiet curiosity. "You sound like someone who has done this before." She smiled politely but answered only, "I have learned that evidence deserves friends." The bakery door opened again, and Mr. Whitaker, who owned the old shoe repair shop, stepped inside carrying a faded envelope. "Mrs. Alvarez called," he said. "You should see this." His notice matched theirs almost perfectly. The wording was identical. The warning language was identical. Even the spacing between paragraphs looked as though every page had been printed from the same template. But something else caught Maya's attention. "Your inspection claims you refused access." Mr. Whitaker looked genuinely confused. "That cannot be true. I was visiting my daughter in another state that entire week." The shop was closed. Daniel exchanged a long glance with the woman. The room suddenly felt smaller as each new document revealed another piece of the same pattern. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody rushed toward conclusions. They simply kept placing facts beside facts until coincidence became increasingly difficult to believe. Maya carefully organized every document into chronological order. "We are no longer examining isolated complaints," she said quietly. "We are examining a system." Daniel looked through the front window at the familiar storefronts lining the street. Yesterday they had seemed like neighboring businesses. Today they looked like pages from the same story. The woman slowly opened her leather notebook once more, writing only a single sentence before closing it again. Daniel could not read the words, but he noticed the confidence in her handwriting had changed. Outside, a city maintenance truck rolled past the bakery without stopping, while 2 blocks away a commercial real estate survey team quietly began measuring the sidewalks surrounding the entire block, long before any public announcement had been made. The stack of documents continued growing across the large wooden work table until there was barely enough room left for the morning bread trays. Inspection notices from the flower shop, The shoe repair store, the bookstore, and Daniel's bakery now rested side by side, each one carrying different dates but strangely familiar language. Maya drew careful lines between reference numbers while Mrs. Alvarez brewed another pot of coffee for everyone without being asked. No one hurried. No one celebrated. Every new discovery demanded another question instead of another conclusion. The woman stood quietly near the front window watching families walk through the neighborhood as children headed toward school and delivery trucks unloaded fresh produce for nearby stores. Finally, she turned back toward the table. "This block still breathes," she said softly. "Someone is trying to convince everyone it is already dying." Daniel followed her gaze outside. He had spent nearly 15 years watching the same sidewalks wake up every morning. Yet he had never noticed how closely each small business depended on the others. Parents bought breakfast before stopping at the bookstore. The florist sent customers to the bakery for coffee. The grocery store recommended the shoe repair shop to older neighbors. They were not simply businesses sharing a street. They quietly carried one another through difficult seasons. Maya unfolded a city zoning map she had requested from public records several months earlier for an unrelated client. She placed it beside the inspection notices. "Look here," she said. The highlighted redevelopment district stretched across the entire block, ending exactly where Daniel's bakery stood. Mrs. Alvarez frowned. "That was not their last year." Maya nodded. "The proposal was amended recently." The woman leaned closer. "Who benefits if every long-term tenant leaves before redevelopment begins?" Maya answered carefully. "Whoever purchases the property without existing lease protections." Silence settled across the bakery once again. Daniel looked from the map to the notices, then toward the familiar storefronts outside. "So this was never about my bakery?" "No," Maya replied. "Your bakery simply happened to become the latest piece." At that moment, the woman reached into her coat and removed the leather notebook she had carried since the rainy night. She placed it gently on the table and opened it for the first time in front of everyone. Inside were detailed observations from the previous 2 days. Times, conversations, layout sketches of the bakery, notes about the donation ledger, the temperature log, the community pantry baskets, the dark cash register, and Graham's exact words. Every page had been dated. Every observation separated from every opinion. Daniel looked surprised. "You have been documenting everything." She met his eyes without hesitation. "Because people deserve to be believed for what they actually did, not for what someone later claims they did." Maya slowly turned another page. "These notes are remarkably disciplined." The woman smiled faintly. "I learned a long time ago that memory changes under pressure. Paper changes less." Daniel studied her quietly. "You still have not told me why you ask questions like an investigator." She took a slow breath before answering. "Because I have spent years deciding where communities deserve investment, and I stopped trusting polished presentations long ago. I trust ordinary mornings much more." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then she continued, "My name is Eleanor Vale. I work with a foundation that restores neighborhood businesses and builds community kitchens. I was traveling to inspect this district when my car broke down during the storm." Daniel absorbed the words without changing his expression. He did not suddenly treat her differently. He did not apologize for questioning her. He simply nodded once. "Then I am glad your car chose this street." Eleanor smiled with genuine warmth. "So am I." Maya looked from Eleanor to the documents spread across the table. "If your organization is evaluating this neighborhood, then you should know one more thing." She pointed toward the zoning map. "A commercial acquisition meeting is scheduled tomorrow morning." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the date. "Tomorrow?" Maya nodded. "If these properties change hands before the tenants understand what is happening, many of these businesses could lose their leverage." Daniel looked back through the bakery window where Mr. Whitaker was unlocking his repair shop while Mrs. Alvarez arranged flowers outside her entrance exactly as she had done for years. He spoke so quietly that only the 3 people beside him could hear. "Then we are not trying to save one bakery anymore." Eleanor closed her notebook with deliberate care. "No," she replied. Now we are trying to save a neighborhood before someone convinces it that it has already disappeared. At that same moment, several miles away, a conference room screen displayed a finalized agenda for a private property acquisition meeting, and beside the first item appeared a simple instruction in bold letters. Confirm all legacy tenants have been cleared before closing. The afternoon sunlight slowly drifted across the bakery floor as the conversation came to an uneasy end, but the weight inside Daniel's heart only grew heavier. Saving one business suddenly seemed possible. Saving an entire neighborhood felt almost impossible. Eleanor remained standing beside the old work table, quietly reviewing the zoning map while Maya organized every document into labeled folders. Nothing about the room suggested panic. Every movement was calm, measured, and deliberate. The truth deserved steady hands. Just after 3 o'clock, the bell above the bakery door rang once again. Daniel looked up and immediately recognized the distinguished older gentleman entering the shop. Arthur Bell, the owner of the entire building. His tailored coat was spotless despite the damp sidewalks outside, and his smile carried the polished confidence of someone accustomed to difficult negotiations ending in his favor. "Daniel," Arthur said warmly, "may we speak privately?" Daniel glanced toward Eleanor and Maya before nodding. "The office is through here." Arthur followed him into the small back room where shelves of flour, mixing bowls, and baking supplies surrounded a worn wooden desk. Noah's school drawings still hung beside the calendar on the wall. Arthur noticed them before quietly placing a thick envelope onto the desk. "You have built a respectable business," he began. "Nobody questions your work ethic." Daniel remained silent. Arthur folded his hands. "That is why I believe we can solve this without unnecessary conflict." He slid the envelope forward. Inside rested a revised lease agreement. The proposed rent increase had disappeared. The violation notice would be withdrawn. The lease would be renewed for another 5 years under nearly the same terms Daniel already had. One condition appeared beneath the signature line. Daniel read it twice. By signing, he would acknowledge that the recent inspection had resulted from an administrative misunderstanding and agree not to participate in any collective complaint regarding the property management process. Arthur spoke gently. "You have a son. Stability matters more than arguments." Daniel slowly lowered the papers onto the desk. "What about Mrs. Alvarez?" Arthur answered carefully. "This agreement concerns your bakery." "What about Mr. Whitaker?" Arthur's expression remained calm. "His situation is separate." "The bookstore." Arthur sighed quietly. "Daniel, you cannot carry everyone." Silence filled the small office. Through the half-open doorway came the faint sound of customers chatting over fresh coffee, unaware that the future of the entire block now rested inside one quiet conversation. Arthur spoke again. "Sometimes wisdom means protecting your own family first." Daniel looked toward Noah's drawings taped to the wall. One picture showed the bakery with smoke rising from the chimney and a child holding hands with his father beneath a bright yellow sun. Another showed a loaf of bread surrounded by smiling stick figures. Daniel smiled sadly before looking back at Arthur. "Every one of those neighbors watched my son grow up." Arthur nodded politely. "I understand." "Do you?" Daniel asked softly. "Because they covered this bakery when Noah was sick. Mrs. Alvarez watched him after school when I had early deliveries. Mr. Whitaker repaired his first bicycle without charging me $1. The grocery store carried my bread when business was slow." He rested one hand on the unsigned agreement. "You are asking me to protect my family by pretending theirs does not exist." Arthur's polished smile faded for the first time. "Business requires difficult choices." Daniel nodded. "It does." He carefully removed the signature page from the agreement, folded the remaining documents neatly together, and placed the unsigned contract back inside the envelope. He did not tear it apart. He did not throw it away. He simply returned it. "I cannot sign this." Arthur studied him for several long seconds. "You may regret that decision." Daniel answered quietly. "Perhaps. But my son will someday ask me how we kept this bakery. I need to be able to answer him honestly." Arthur stood, picked up the envelope, and walked toward the office door. Before leaving, he paused without turning around. Tomorrow morning changes everything. Then he disappeared back into the front of the bakery, offering polite smiles to customers before stepping outside. Eleanor had watched the entire exchange from across the room without interrupting. When Arthur's car finally pulled away, she approached Daniel. "You did not even ask what the agreement was worth." Daniel looked out the front window toward the flower shop where Mrs. Alvarez was arranging fresh bouquets beneath the afternoon sun. If the price was everyone else, it was already too expensive. Eleanor lowered her eyes for a brief moment, then carefully placed the unsigned copy Maya had quietly photographed into her notebook beside the other evidence. "That," she said almost to herself, "was the answer I needed." Across town, inside the conference room where the acquisition meeting was scheduled for the following morning, a revised agenda appeared on the screen, and beside Daniel Mercer's name someone typed a short note that would soon become far more important than anyone in that room realized. Refused individual